Welcome, everyone. I am Rod Richards, proud and pleased to serve as minister of Unitarian Universalists, San Luis Obispo, and it is our great pleasure to be hosting this Martin Luther King service organized by People of Faith for Justice and led by two longtime beloved members of this congregation, Ken Hill and Gina Whitaker. After this service, we invite you into our social hall right outside those doors, and there will be a brief Q&A session with Gina and Ken, so you'll be able to talk to them about this service. Celebrating a powerful figure like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. can be complicated, right? As Clinton Lee Scott pointed out, always it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision. King's dream provides a vision of what ought to be without ever losing sight of the practical matters of what is. And that is the reason we celebrate all that his vision helped to achieve, and also why we feel his vision calling us to engage the struggle for all that needs to be done. His vision was effective in its time, but it was not limited to its time. He was reality-based, but not reality-bound. And the ideals he held for beloved community call to us still. So welcome to this time and this place and these people. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Rich Kurrasch, former Executive Director for People of Faith for Justice, to introduce the service. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Rod, and good afternoon. Welcome also to everyone to this it's a reunion in a way. We have, PFJ has not had the opportunity to support these services on Martin Luther King weekend for a couple of years now, for the obvious reason. And you may have noticed in your bulletin that it's not my name, but Jim Nielsen's name, who appears in the service. When the PFJ board talked a few weeks ago about getting this service organized, we selected Jim Nielsen as the one to kind of set the stage, as it were, for what is to follow in the next hour. Jim is one of the founding members of People of Faith for Justice, PFJ as we say for short. It's the interfaith voice for social and environmental justice on the Central Coast. Jim was there from the beginning and continues as one of the members of our board of directors. And the board asked him to speak out of his own experience, his long years, decades really, of participation in the social justice movement, as to what it has meant to him personally over the course of his life's journey, but also to say perhaps a few words of encouragement to the rest of us as we all look ahead to the part that is unfinished, as Rod alluded to just a moment ago. All went well until Jim had an encounter with a rather pesky and persistent virus. And while he has recovered and had hoped to be here with us today, he was not up to addressing the subject for which we had honored him just a few scant weeks ago. So unfortunately, necessarily, and I have to beg your indulgence in my use of the metaphor, this required that our head coach, Gina, required Coach Gina to go to the bullpen, where she found me lounging around for this 9th inning substitution. But even though he's not here, we know what he would say, pretty much, because all of us we would share many of the same feelings, many of the same concerns, same perceptions, stemming from our own commitments in whatever form they have taken over the years, to our own involvement in social justice work. We overlap in our visions, in our experience, in our hopes, in our dreams, and in our frustrations, that we know what it is that we, in fact, do share together. So we celebrate progress on many fronts, of course. We point to significant achievements. We rejoice in the good fruit that hard work does indeed bear. But we know only too well that the work is unfinished and that the road ahead must require the same kinds of commitments as we honor today, both in the life and legacy of Dr. King himself, as well as in the legions of those who went before him, paving the way, the legions of those who followed him the last half century, bearing witness to his witness over all of this time. Hard and demanding work. We grow tired and we grow discouraged. But the work goes on. And so well we know that tomorrow when we get up, we will be about that same work because, well, it's who we are. It's what we do day by day. But today we're in for a treat. The day is like a pause at the oasis, if you will. And we pause to remember and to celebrate and to honor faithfulness to the task at hand, but not incidentally. One thing more, we pause to refresh the well from which we draw for strength and hope and inspiration. And to that end, it's my good pleasure to introduce Gina and Ken, who have an incredible story to tell today. It is food for the spirit indeed. Gina and Ken, in a way, it's, they're like Cher. No need for a last name. Because we know who you are. And the role that you have played all these many years in our community. And we're delighted to share in this moment that you've prepared for us. Gina and Ken.
Up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind walking and talking with my mind. Come on! Stayed on freedom. Oh yes, I'm walking and talking with my mind. You know that it's stayed walking with my mind. You know that it's set on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Oh, well, there ain't no harm with your mind. Set on freedom. Oh, no, there ain't no harm with your mind. You know when it's set on freedom. I said there ain't no harm with your mind. When it's set on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Come on and walk now. Walk, walk. You better walk, walk. Come on and walk, walk. With your mind on freedom. Walk, walk. Come on and walk, walk. You better walk, walk. With your mind on freedom. Oh, you better walk, walk. Come on and walk, walk. Well, I'm singing and shouting with my mind. Stay on freedom. Singing and shouting with my mind. You know it's stay on freedom. I said I'm singing and shouting with my mind. You know that it's stay on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Voting rights trek. Dateline, Oregonian, Portland, Oregon, 22 March 1965, page 1. Selma, Alabama, AP. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led thousands Sunday in a massive highway pilgrimage, heavily guarded by Army troops, and told his tired followers at the end of the 8-mile walk they were part of a, quote, an unstoppable movement, unquote. King walked at the head of his civil rights legions on the first leg of a 50-mile, 5-day march to the Alabama Capitol to protest the denial of Negro voting rights. The first step was taken at 12:48 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. We got up real early on our first morning in Selma. We had planned our day to start by walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge from the west side of Selma to the east, as if it were us starting a long walk to freedom. We had arrived in Selma the day before and had not seen the bridge yet, but we knew it was close to our Airbnb, so we drove a few blocks and parked on the corner. We got out and walked around the corner. There it was, the bridge, a humpbacked mass of steel with 2 lanes of traffic whizzing by us, traveling east and west. I went ahead and started climbing up the hump, plodding along, my tennis shoes gripping the walkway with each step I took. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I quietly sang that song to myself as I walked. I looked over the edge of the bridge, down to the Alabama River, 100 feet below us. It was beautiful. So much beauty on this crisp autumn morning at the site of where there had been so much violence, followed by so much determination. This short stroll was just the beginning of our days in Alabama, confronting the many truths about our American history.
Now, it took 3 attempts for the determined alliance of marchers to continue their way from Selma to the Capitol at Montgomery, Alabama. As I climbed that hill of steel, my mind went back to the first attempt on Sunday, March 7th, 1965. One cannot see what is on the other side of that hill as one climbs. When I reached the top, it sent shivers up my spine as I imagined that for the first time, the leaders would have seen the state troopers, the police, and the horses arrayed to stop them. Despite the obvious danger, they kept going. On reaching the police, they could not continue, but they would not be turned back. Instead of striking out or turning back, they knelt to pray. Instead of being arrested, they were set upon in seconds and savagely beaten, trampled by horses and tear gassed. 17 marchers were sent to the hospital and 50 were treated for their injuries. But instead of letting Bloody Sunday turn them back, more people came. A judicial order supported their right to march, and seeing that they were determined to go on, the federal government supported them by federalizing the National Guard. Why did they do this? To show that the murder of protesters like Jimmy Lee Jackson would not stop them from getting the vote, that violence was impotent at stopping them, that determination, allies, and prayer were sufficient to win the day. On March 21st, 1965, the original 500 to 600 marchers had swelled to about 8,000. And by the time they reached the Capitol in Montgomery on March 25th, there were 25,000 people in attendance. In Dr. King's speech at the Capitol, "How long, not long," he says, "The end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience." Our nation's conscience continued to be brutalized on that evening with the assassination of Viola Liuzzo, a white mother of 5. We still have not found peace for our conscience, but we will not be turned around. Please stand, if you wish, to join in singing "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round." The words will appear on the screen. Steve will play it through once for us, and then we will sing. Let's try this again. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. Those are the words at the entrance to the Southern Poverty Law Center's Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, Alabama. The Freedom Rides exemplify the courage and endurance of some of these heroes. Freedom Rides took place during the spring and fall of 1961. They sounded simple enough: an integrated bus trip through the South to test the decision of the 1960 Boynton versus Virginia Supreme Court case. Take note, these riders were strictly
These rides were strictly an attempt to enforce laws that were already on the books. The Federal Interstate Commerce Act prohibited racial discrimination on all interstate transportation, as well as in terminal facilities. Ironically, this Supreme Court ruling triggered a violent reaction to this attempt to claim established rights. By anybody's standards, the most dangerous confrontation since the Montgomery bus boycott. The real heroes went well beyond the well-known leaders of the civil rights era. Freedom riders included Blacks and whites, some of the youngest, most courageous women and men. Immediately, a young seminary student in Nashville named John Lewis knew he wanted to be involved. Bernard Lafayette, C.T. Vivian, Diane Nash, James Lawson, and James Bevel were just a few of the better-known young folks who set out in trailways and Greyhound buses, pushing the envelope and enraging law enforcement and Klan members alike. The road from Washington, D.C. all the way to New Orleans was a long and winding trail that began in the May of 1961 and did not end until the federal government stepped in and made it clear that the violence and discrimination would simply no longer be tolerated. These young foot soldiers in this war for human rights were unequivocal in their demand for results and just as committed to nonviolence as an ongoing strategy. The Freedom Riders encountered extreme violence on their rides, increasing at every stop. One bus was bombed in Anniston, Alabama, and in Birmingham, the riders were beaten by the Ku Klux Klan while local police commissioner Bull Connor gave the white mob free rein to attack. I was fascinated by these stories of these young men and women, mostly in their early 20s then, as I wandered through the Freedom Rides Museum in Montgomery, the former Greyhound station, where Freedom Riders had been beaten. Their stories were compelling, and I thought of how I, at their age then, had not had the courage to come to Mississippi or Alabama to join the movement there. When the Attorney General Robert Kennedy finally realized that the Freedom Rides had begun to be life-threatening to riders, he tried to stop them. Diane Nash, who'd been thoroughly trained in nonviolent resistance by Reverend James Lawson in Nashville, refused to stop the Freedom Rides. As riders boarded the buses, they would often hand Diane envelopes containing their last will and testaments and their parents' phone numbers, knowing that at any time someone could be killed. In a now famous phone conversation between Diane Nash and Robert Kennedy's representative in Alabama, she said, "You are a good man, Mr. Siegenthaler, but we are not going to be moved. This has to end. We will not let violence overcome nonviolence." The Freedom Riders were deeply committed to ending segregation and refused to be turned around or separated from each other in their quest for freedom. Please join me in a responsive reading, A Network of Mutuality. It's number 584 in the gray hymnal. I guess I better get it, huh? I'll start, you read the italicized words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. We must evolve for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. A stone of hope.
apparently Martin Luther King's last words before he was shot were to the piano player, Ben. It says, "Ben, play Precious Lord real pretty tonight." So it was his favorite hymn. We're going to do our best. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my light is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
Thank you, Don. Thank you so much for sharing Precious Lord with us. It's easy to see why that was Martin Luther King's favorite song. Faith in the churches were and still are critical in pursuing the ideal that civil rights, respect, and basic needs are every human's birthright. The churches were critical in the 1960s for the same reason that the stable was critical to Jesus's family. There was simply no other place to go. No secular institution would provide the basics for the movement to grow: a safe haven, meeting space, sustenance, and the faith to carry on. The support went beyond the walls of the churches as members provided beds, food, cars, people, and leadership. Prophetic, eloquent ministers like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Shuttlesworth, and so many others provided inspiration and sometimes prodded church leadership to overcome their fears and do the right thing. We visited many churches and learned their stories. I can only mention a few. Birmingham's Bethel Baptist Church was served by Fred Shuttlesworth, who walked away from a blast of 16 sticks of dynamite under his study on Christmas Day in 1956. The parsonage was literally leveled, But Pastor Shuttlesworth was uninjured. He saw this as a call from God. The church played a critical role for meetings, planning, and support for nonviolent direct actions. It was bombed 3 times for its efforts. When the NAACP was banned from operations in Alabama in 1956, Fred Shuttlesworth and 11 other pastors immediately formed the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. It quickly grew to 60 churches to continue the work for civil and human rights in Alabama. It kept operating until 1969. The 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham was a site for mass meetings, a rallying point for marches, training, and so much more. Key leaders like Fred Shuttlesworth, Martin Luther King Jr., Southern Christian Leadership Conference leaders, and more spoke there. The most tragic of a string of 45 bombings occurred here on Sunday, September 15th, 1963. 4 young girls were killed when a 19-stick dynamite bomb exploded next to the basement. In addition to the deaths of Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair, 22 others were injured. That afternoon, 2 more young boys, Johnny Robinson and Virgil Ware, were murdered. The boys' murderers were eclipsed by the tragedy of the bombing. These tragedies are why Birmingham was known as Bombingham. We also visited Mount Zion Methodist Church in Philadelphia, Mississippi with the Living Legacy Tour. A member for her entire life, Jewel Rush McDonald, shared her and her family's experiences on or about June 21st, 1964. Because their church was suspected of supporting voting registration education, they were targeted by the KKK and local authorities. The sheriff staked out the church. On seeing lights from a meeting that had nothing to do with the voting registration workers, he notified a vigilante group, including National Guard members. The gang assaulted the people at the meeting and burned the church down. Civil rights workers, Michael Schwirmer, 24, James Cheney, 21, and Andrew Goodman, 20, came to investigate the burning. They were pursued on leaving town and murdered by a gang of white men, including members of law enforcement. The church was burned 3 times and rebuilt each time. It is still there. In the face of these horrific events, the churches kept praying, kept their doors open, kept supporting each other, kept faith in their God, and kept faith that freedom, real freedom, would come. We will remain seated as we sing Circle Around for Freedom, number 155 in the gray hymnals. We will listen to Don Gaede and Steve Kadin, who will sing it through twice. Then we will join them as we sing it 2 more times together.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us in prison, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us in prison, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. One more time. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace. For all of us in prison. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
And so I say to you today that I still stand by nonviolence, and I am still convinced, that it is the most potent weapon available to the Negro in his struggle for justice in this country. And the other thing is, I'm concerned about a better world. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about that, he can never advocate violence. For through violence you may murder a murderer, but you can't murder murder. Through violence you may murder a liar, but you can't establish truth. Through violence you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate through violence. Darkness can not put out darkness. Only light can do that. And I say to you, I've also decided to stick with love. But I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems. And I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about it in some circles today. And I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. But I have seen too much hate. I've seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen and too many white citizens, counselors in the South, to want to hate myself, because every time I see it, I know that it does something to their faces and their personalities. And I say to myself that hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to love. If you're seeking the highest good, I think you can find it through love. And the beautiful thing is that we aren't moving wrong when we do it, because John was right. God is love. He who hates does not know God, but he who loves has the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of ultimate reality.
What is a pilgrimage? Consider the words of Sister Macrina Whitaker, Benedictine monastic, author, and spiritual guide. A pilgrimage is a ritual journey with a hallowed purpose. Every step along the way has meaning. The pilgrim knows that life-giving challenges will emerge. A pilgrimage is not a vacation. It's a transformational journey during which significant change takes place. New insights are given. Deeper understanding is attained. New and old places in the heart are visited. Blessings are received, and healing takes place. On return from the pilgrimage, life is seen with different eyes. Nothing will ever quite be the same again. I am sure this is what happened, what I experienced on our Living Legacy pilgrimage to the Mississippi Delta. The Living Legacies Project mission is inspiring today's work for racial justice with lessons from the civil rights movement. I had long wanted to travel to the Deep South to visit the sites where events of the 60s civil rights era, so important to the history and legacy of this country, had occurred. Now was the time. The living legacy's spiritual and healing journeys transform people's lives. I felt transformed as I listened to Angela Chaney, who you see on the screen, speak to us about her father, James Chaney, one of the 3 civil rights workers who were killed by the Klan in 1964. Angela stood on her father's grave and began, quote, "I never met my father. I was born 2 months after he was murdered. I'm looking forward, though, to the day where he and I meet face to face." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't have to share her belief about heaven or meeting your loved ones in an afterlife to know how serious she was. Angela knew nothing about her father until she was 20 years old and met his mother, her grandmother, and came to know her father through his mother's eyes. Angela has dedicated the rest of her life to caring for James's and his mother's grave sites and telling James Chaney's story, her way of speaking out in the continuing struggle for racial justice that we face today. I felt transformed listening to Hezekiah Watkins, who you see on the screen, share his story. At 13, he was curious about the freedom rides he had heard so much about. The freedom rides were peaking after so much violence met with the dignity of nonviolence. More and more young men and women were taking to the trailways and Greyhound buses. Diane Nash and the other organizers were determined to complete the full itinerary that had been set out by CORE. They would push on to Mississippi and then to New Orleans. As the first Trailways bus began pulling into the terminal in Jackson, Mississippi, Hezekiah and a couple of his friends went down to see what the excitement was. Police were arresting all those freedom riders who had just come into Jackson on the latest stop in their campaign to desegregate interstate transportation. His buddies thought they were being funny when they pushed him onto the bus. Hezekiah was only 13, but he looked tall. He was tall and he looked much older. The police thought he was a freedom rider and arrested him too. At 13, Hezekiah Watkins spent 5 days on death row in Parchman Prison until his mother bailed him out. Hezekiah was recruited into the movement after that and was arrested some 109 times in his activist career. At 71, he's still transforming people by telling his incredible story to the groups at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, where we heard him in Jackson, Mississippi. I felt transformed as I stood in the driveway of Medgar and Myrlie Evers' home, where Medgar Evers was shot and killed. Our guides noted that the home did not have a front door. As you can see, it had been closed over to reduce the danger of someone shooting into the home or breaking in through the door. Evers opened an NAACP office soon after they moved to Jackson in 1955 and was an outspoken activist for voter registration and social justice. Standing there gazing at the kitchen door from the carport, listening to the story of the family's courage, I could almost hear the shots ring out as Evers exited his car and see the blood on the driveway. Medgar Evers once said, "I'm looking to be shot anytime I step out of my car. If I die, it will be in a good cause. I've been fighting for America just as much as the soldiers in Vietnam." His life was taken from him on June 12, 1963. I think about the 60s often, the heroic moment in the history of this country, and I wonder what, in the end, did it all mean? Amid all the symbols of backlash and progress, what were the incontrovertible accomplishments? And what does the enormity of the courage and persistence of so many people whose lives were in the balance and on the line for freedom amount to when measured against efforts to override our democracy that we've seen in recent years? Perhaps my transformation is just beginning, even as I near the later years of my life. This pilgrimage has left nearly as many questions as it has provided answers. I leave you with this thought, though. Do not be afraid to travel to places you've never been, to talk with people you've never met, and to listen with an open heart to their stories of transformation. It's good medicine for our hurting world.
I will never forget meeting Dennis Damer. The Damer family was relatively prosperous for a Black family in Hattiesburg, Mississippi during the 50s and 60s. They and their neighbors built a school on their land under the Rosenwald School Program. They courageously supported voting rights workers during the Freedom Summer voter registration drive. They knew their love and courage made them targets. The KKK firebombed their home and shot many rounds of gunfire into the house. Vernon Damer held off the attackers while the rest of the family escaped into the barn that you see here. His single-handed defense was so intense that the KKK thought it might be the FBI defending the house. The attackers drove away in fear, but unfortunately, Vernon died of the injuries from the fire. The Damers were not driven off. Family members still live in that rebuilt house. Dennis and his family are rebuilding the school to be used as a community center. The extended family is tracing out its multiracial roots and having considerable success in uniting many distant, diverse members of their clan. Hate lost and love won. I am so glad that we started our pilgrimage to the South with Living Legacy Pilgrimage to Mississippi. The Living Legacy Project asked us to join them to explore a vision of a United States that acknowledges and works to heal the wounds of racism rooted in our history of slavery and oppression. They confirmed the wisdom of Dr. King in showing us that the consequences of hate are death and the power of love can redeem. Our nation has suffered from so much hate, evidenced by the bombings, the lynchings, the murders, the needless suffering inflicted in so many ways. The root cause is always the same: hatred dressed up as greed, jealousy, fear, and that most insidious weapon of hate, indifference. Fortunately, our pilgrimage also showed us something of the promised land that Dr. King talked about. The evidence of healing was in meeting people and hearing the stories of those who came out of the horrors with their capacity to love intact. While being touched by individuals and their stories is of paramount importance, institutions are also important. They can be powerful tools for loving people to work together. One institution that both clarifies and meets suffering, past and present, is the Equal Justice Initiative based in Montgomery, Alabama. We visited EJI's, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a memorial to the more than 4,400 American men, women, and children that were brutally killed or lynched between 1877 and 1950s. Racial terror lynchings continued into the 1980s. The victims' names are engraved on 800 six-foot steel monuments. Each monument is inscribed with the victims of a particular county. As you walk through the monuments, you descend, and the monuments stay fixed to the roof, making them seem to rise. This sacred place truly elevates these individuals whose lives were stolen after they were supposedly set free. We honor them by raising up the truth of what really happened. The EJI Memorial and Museum clearly document that slavery has not completely ended, but has evolved into our mass incarceration system. The companion institution is called the Legacy Museum, From Enslavement to Mass Incarceration. It documents the stunning legacy of slavery in personal stories, numbers, and impactful art. It also documents the horrors of the incarceration system that is designed to grind up human beings and spit them out, completely dehumanized. These are the people that we do not see today, locked up, shut away, and commercially abused. I highly recommend learning about the work of Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson. They are a powerful resource to educate us all about the evolution of slavery and the efforts needed to end it in all of its manifestations, once and for all. Both the pilgrimage and Dr. King taught us to love, but also to be maladjusted to the consequences of our history. That same history of our civil rights legacy is evidence that loving determination and discipline work. The murderers and hate did not stop the transformation of our society. For love to win, we need to continue driving out hate. Van Jones, a well-known activist and commentator, called progressives the love people. He said that we would never out-hate the haters, and we should not try. We are simply not that good at it. So let us start a love competition. Those that love the most, that love the best, win. Now, there are some that don't want to compete in a love contest. I've heard some say that we should not be woke, that we should not embrace the full pain that love feels and celebrate the love and celebrate the victories that love has won. They have it wrong. We need to be fully awake to see that our history does not teach us to be angry or guilty. It teaches that love won and will keep on winning until the work is done. We cannot tolerate isolating Black history and experience to Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Black History Month. These are rich histories with ample resources to explore all year long. They are American history through and through. The tools, power, and determination that shone through in that liminal time are what we need right here, right now. The power that seriously cracked oppressive power structures from border to border in this country can still bring justice and freedom in these distressful times. We have no right to be hopeless. Contemplating mass incarceration, white supremacy, and rampant violence can make me feel that the garment of destiny has been soiled beyond recovery. But then I remember how powerful love is, always ready to bring redemption. Love empowers us to see each other and the suffering that is going on right in front of us. Now, if I sound upset, it is because this pilgrimage has helped me to grow even more maladjusted to the indifference and suffering going on right now. It doesn't have to continue. Only love can guide us. Only a sober, clear-eyed, beauty-seeking love can see what is and what needs to be done. This love calls me to a daily pilgrimage leading to a beautiful promised land, but it does not promise comfort or ease in the status quo. Now, there are many paths to take. If you can avail yourself of a powerful experience like those from the Living Legacy Project and Equal Justice Initiative, by all means do so. But if you can't, there are many ways to create your own pilgrimage. There are movies, books, book groups, institutions that need your help, and so much more. Whatever you do, do it to join others, celebrate diversity, and joyfully build that promised land together. There are institutions right here on the Central Coast that are available to do that crucial work of coming together. Here are a few. Race Matters centers Black voices in matters of racial justice. Go to their events. Help them create a welcoming environment right here on the Central Coast. The Diversity Coalition, San Luis Obispo County, has great events and works in schools. Certainly support the NAACP here in SLO and the national organization. You can sign up for People of Faith for Justice newsletter to not only find out what we are doing, but also to connect with other groups and happenings. Find out what your religious home is doing to dismantle white supremacy, educate your congregation, and get resources out to counter the effects of oppression and participate in those. One very concrete thing that you can do today is to support the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Scholarship Fund. The Scholarship Fund is dedicated to providing multiple scholarship awards to students graduating from local high schools since 1969. We traditionally support them at this service. Your free will offering will be accepted in the foyer or in the social hall as you leave the service. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we have materials from our journey in the social hall and would be glad to answer your questions there. We are the love people, as Van Jones says. Let's get out there and show the world what love can do. I now invite Reverend Jason Sink-Provencio to lead us in prayer and offer a benediction.
Before I offer this closing prayer, I just want to say thank you to Gina and to Ken, who have no last name, who need no last name. Thank you for sharing this pilgrimage with us, Gina and Ken. You are welcome to pray with me now this prayer that was given by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Oh God, we thank you for the fact that you have inspired men and women in all nations and in all cultures. We call you different names. Some call you Allah. Some call you Elohim. Some call you Jehovah. Some call you Brahma. Some call you the unmoved mover. But we know that these are all names for one and the same God. Grant that we will follow you and become so committed to your way and your kingdom that we will be able to establish in our lives and in this world a brother and sisterhood, that we will be able to establish here a kingdom of understanding where men and women will live together as brothers and sisters and respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. Amen. And now, a benediction inspired by words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. God, give us strength of body to keep walking for freedom. God, give us strength to remain nonviolent, even though we may face death. Remind us that darkness cannot cast out darkness. Only light can do that. And reassure us that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I now welcome you to rise as you wish and join in singing This Little Light of Mine, a gospel song that became an anthem of the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s. It was originally written by Harry Dixon Lowes around 1920 as a children's song. Find it in the gray hymnals, number 118, or you can follow the words on the screen.
Sure. be in the social hall out here. If you'd like to take